Guys, so today I'm giving you another book haul. So I'm giving you the book haul starting from like the 14th of August, I believe, up until this point in time, so up until the 3rd of December. For my doing, this is a relatively big book haul that has everything to do with TBR, of course, having been reached, but it is definitely a step down from the amount of book buying that I was doing in the months of July and the first half of August. And actually a big part of this is going to be the second half of August, I believe. So I definitely did buy less in like September, October, November. And for most of those books I've also read a lot more than I have of the July first half of August books. So I'm definitely keeping up more with the purchase that I'm making at this point in time. So which also will be reflected again in my TBR update when I do it on the 1st of January probably. Big chunk of that is still going to be the leftover from July when I went all out in terms of book buying. So the first book that I'm going to talk about, and I had to kind of restart myself here because I was already giving you a review of the book, and that's the problem with giving you a book haul when I've basically already read most of the book. So I'm gonna keep it brief, maybe I'll just pretend as if I haven't read them yet. And so we're starting off with Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bastarrica, which is a novel translated from Spanish from an Argentinian novelist. Tender is the Flesh is a condemnation of the meat industry by drawing a parallel, by looking at a society in which people can no longer consume animal flesh, so instead we industrialize the consumption of human flesh. A little bit more difficult to stomach potentially, so do be wary of going into that if that's the type of content that you have difficulty consuming, because it isn't like it emphasizes the gore, but it does talk about these gruesome acts in a detached style, which to me actually has more of an impact than if it were to sensationalize the horror or the gore within this one. Next up I got a few comic books, of which I have read 2.5, and so I got the comics within the Buffy series, and I'm hoping to get some more for Christmas so that I continue. I got Buffy Volume 2, I got Angel Volume 1, and then I also got Buffy The Chosen Ones. This is the one that I haven't fully finished yet because in the reading order I should have only read half of this at this point in time. So this is part of the reboot series of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so kind of a new approach at Buffy. Its first issue was quite similar to what we know Buffy is, but some of the sort of like representation that is in the later seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer already creeps in from the beginning. But from issue 2 we're already taking quite a different route with some of these characters, so it's interesting to see what they'll do continuing on now, and so I'm hoping to receive some more within this series for Christmas so that I can keep on chipping away at this series. Next book that I got was Before Your Memory Fades by Toshikawa Kawaguchi. So this is the third book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. This is a series of short stories surrounding a cafe in which you can travel back in time. However, you need to make sure that you return before your coffee gets cold or you will be stuck in the past. This one kind of has a different location, so I haven't read this one yet, but it takes place in a sort of like side branch of the cafe, I guess, and so I'm looking forward to rereading it. I'm not entirely sure whether I should reread Before the Coffee Gets Cold and Tales from the Cafe first or not. I'll probably just dive in without doing so and then at some point reread all 3 of them and see if that changes my experience. Next up, it was time for one of the biggest releases of this year when it comes to fantasy, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. So this is the beautiful Illumicrate edition for Babel with these beautiful sprayed edges, and then this beautiful under the dust jacket art. I absolutely adore this edition of Babel. Babel itself for me will be like a 4-star read. I enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting. It dives into very interesting thematics. It is a little bit on the nose when it comes to those thematics, but that's also perfectly fine. Some of these topics can still use an out in the open discussion at this point in time, but the emotional connection to me with this book wasn't necessarily all there. and so that led to me kind of being bored a little bit in the first half. Second half definitely picked up a whole lot for me, but so the emotional connection is what keeps this from being a 5-star for me. And then the second edition of Babel that I got is the beautiful Fairy Loot edition. So this is very glary, and so it has a beautiful sprayed edge, and then under the end pages are like illustrated end pages with this beautiful cover art. In my Babel reading vlog I have a more detailed dive into these two different editions, and so I will link that below in case you're interested in that. Next I received a book, I haven't read this one yet, and that is Destiny of the Dead by Cal Cade, second book in the Shroud of Prophecy series, in which we're looking at these two childhood friends. And basically one day one of them figures out that his best friend has been hiding something from him all of his life, because it turns out that he is a chosen one. And this book kind of explores what happens if the chosen one dies, because maybe 50 pages into this book or something like that, our chosen one dies and his best friend kind of has to figure out where to go next. Next up we have a book that I read for the BookTube prize. This is a translated novel, and I had to get this because it's all of the other ones I got on the ebook, but this one did not exist on ebook, and that is How to Order the Universe by Maria Jose Ferreira, translated by Elizabeth Breyer. This is a Chilean novel, I believe, and in this, Chile, and in this one we're looking at this young girl who is basically being raised during Pinochet era Chile. Her father is a traveling salesman, and she very early on is basically like choosing to accompany him in his sales pitches rather than spending time at school where her mother believes her to be at all of this time. So she kind of grows up quickly, or she is surrounded with an adult environment at a very early age onward. But yeah, I'm not giving reviews here. Next we have Mother for Dinner by Shalom Auslander, which is a cannibalist novel. In this one we are looking at the cannibalist society of Americans, and in this society it is the tradition to eat your relatives when they pass away. And so the mother of this family is about to pass away, and her children are debating whether they will continue with this tradition or not, because most of them have kind of turned their back against tradition at this point in time and have integrated with regular American society. This kind of draws parallels between like second generation immigrants' cultural experience versus the experience of their parents who have lived most of their lives in the country that they originate from. Next thing I got was The Collectors by Philip Pullman. So this is a novella in his Dark Materials. It can be read before you read his Dark Materials. It's sort of like teaser, let's call it a teaser, like a teaser trailer to what his Dark Materials can offer. It's charming, small, it's mysterious, a little bit like horror-ish, a little bit like thriller horror-ish, but yeah, it's also super short and it's not that much, and you definitely don't need to read it to read his Dark Materials. So if you're debating starting his Dark Materials, it's not something you need to read before it. I originally read his Dark Materials without reading this one. I also read this one after already having reread the first one, so it's could be interesting, because it could have an impact on how you read his Dark Materials, because you will kind of know something about one of the characters before you figure it out in book one. So in that sense, should you even read it before book one? Make up your own mind. Next up we have The Book Eaters by Sun Yi Dean. This is the Illumicrate edition. This also has a beautiful sprayed edge. This is a sort of like horror fantasy novel in which we're looking at another sort of like unknown American cultural society, which is the Society of Book Eaters, basically people who are not humans and they consume stories for dinner. However, some of them have a sort of like different gene, and so they consume minds in order to survive, and our protagonist gave birth to a mind eater rather than a book eater and is now currently on the run. This one was not really for me. I just really couldn't, I wasn't really interested in this one. I really struggled to emotionally connect to this one, but also intellectually to find much that interested me about this. So this ended up being quite a letdown. I was hoping for the story aspect of it, because of Book Eaters, to really be elaborated more, but honestly speaking, I don't feel like there's much but honestly speaking, there's not much about the love of books within this one. This one definitely has a lot more discussion of like feminist themes and the suppression of females within this cultural society as well. But ultimately, yeah, I was just disappointed with this one. Next up, I received from Sasha, from the Wild Sasha, Once Upon a Time in the North by Philip Pullman, another one of these novellas, another one that can be read before you read his Dark Materials, another one that I feel like you don't need to read before his Dark Materials, you don't even need to read if you aren't all that interested. You know, I think it's like extra in case you really like his Dark Materials, but it also isn't one that, if you don't like his Dark Materials, I don't think that this will interest you, and it won't convince you to like his Dark Materials. I think it's like, yeah, it's charming, it's small, but for me it didn't do a whole lot neither. Then I got She and Her Cat by Makoto Shinkai and Naruki Nagakawa. This is a short story collection to some extent. It is a story told through 4 interconnected short stories. Is probably a better way to explain it, because it does form one cohesive whole. In this one we're following different humans and their cats. We're reading from the perspective of both the cats and the humans, and the cats know one another and there's intermingling amongst that. Some of the cats are relatives to one another, and then the humans sometimes have connections, sometimes get to know one another throughout the story. This is just a warm, cozy hug. It's the perfect book if you want a cozy reading night, and I absolutely adored it. Then we have the final sort of book that I got from a bookish subscription box. Since then, both of my boxes have been cancelled, and that is The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew. I believe this is YA, and I actually have to look up the premise again, because all I really remember is that it had disability rep in it, and that's the reason why I wanted it. But so let's just read it out. Delaney always talked to the dark, but now the dark talks back. Delaney Myers-Petrov is tired of being seen as fragile just because she is deaf. So when she is accepted into a prestigious program at Godboll University that trains students to slip between parallel worlds, she's excited for the chance to prove herself. But her semester gets off to a rocky start when she has an awkward encounter with a pretentious upperclassman whom she has every intention of keeping her distance from. Colton Price has been ordered to keep far away from the new girl and the voices that call to her from the shadows. But the pull of her proves impossible to ignore, and he can't help but be fascinated by her unusual talents. After a fellow student turns up dead, Delaney and Colton are forced to form a tenuous alliance, plummeting down a rabbit hole of deeply buried university secrets. They soon find themselves up against something old and nameless, an enemy that threatens to tear them and their forbidden partnership apart. So, potentially a romance, which I'm not that excited about. I will hope it's sort of like platonic friendship, but probably it's a romance. But it has secret societies, it has parallel worlds, it has deaf representation, so interesting things. The one thing that also is apprehensive to me is that it is a sort of like murder mystery plot, and if you've been around, you know that that does not interest me, and that usually doesn't work out well. But I'm hoping that I'm gonna absolutely love the representation within this one, and that is gonna absolutely overshadow what might not work for me. Then I bought The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante on holiday. In this one we're looking at this like woman who's like, I don't know, 40s, 50s or something like that. Her, more like 50s I guess. Her children are grown up now. She has divorced her husband, so she's on a trip on her own, and she kind of goes to the beach every single day and kind of becomes obsessed with this sort of like Neapolitan family that frequents the beach there as well. And I cannot really say much more about this one, but I did enjoy it. It wasn't something that blew me away, but I definitely did enjoy my time with it, and it made me go like, I might want to try another Ferrante in the future. We are almost there, guys. Then we have The House on the Hill by Cesare Pavesi, which I've since DNF'd. This is an Italian classic set in the set in the city of Turin. It takes place in these sort of like last days of Second World War, and it's kind of looking at the political troubles of an Italy that is on the brink of you know, failure, and that is about to have its regime overturned, and the political troubles and anxieties and struggles within the populace between people supporting the regime, people opposing the regime, the sort of like tensions that arises, people who are pacifists, people who are standing by on the sidelines, people who feel like an active rebellion is needed. But it ultimately didn't interest me enough, and I didn't have an emotional connection or an intellectual connection with it, so that I was just finding myself kind of going through the motions without really taking it much in, and so I decided to just give it up. And then the final book that I have to show here is one that didn't actually add to my TBR because it's a book that I previously read. That's the illustrated edition to the Amber Spyglass, which I have also since read. So this is the third book in His Dark Materials. I've now realized that I've talked about His Dark Materials twice already in this video without actually saying what His Dark Materials is about. So His Dark Materials is a series in which we're mainly following our protagonist called Lyra, who is this young girl who is basically an orphan living at this university college in Oxford, and the adventure kind of starts when her uncle returns from an expedition up north, and some of the members in the college basically try to poison him. I really enjoyed this one. This is a series dealing with parallel worlds. There are witches, there are armored polar bears. There are demons, so basically animal companions that change shape as long as their hosts are children, but for adults they settle down to one form that kind of represents their personality. Yeah, there's just a whole ton about this one that I love. There is a sort of like prediction device that our protagonist knows how to use. So there are many things to latch on to about this series, and there is overall a discussion about religion, especially organized religion. So yeah, that is the final book to talk about. That is everything I got since the 14th of August up until this point in time. I will of course be getting some for Christmas, but that will be a separate book haul, my Christmas book haul. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely let me know your thoughts on some of these books. The majority of them I've already read, so I would say which ones do I need to prioritize, but really I have read most of these books already in the meantime. So yeah, definitely let me know if you're interested in any of these books. Definitely let me know which ones, and you know, if based on this explanation you can think of something else that I might want to pick up, definitely let me know as well. But so yeah, with that I'm gonna end this video. See you guys for the next one. Bye!